I found my graduation dress cut into dozens of pieces in the guest room where my mother had slept, and next to the scissors, a note in her unmistakable handwriting said, "Accidents happen when people want more than they deserve to have." The discovery happened on a Saturday morning that promised to be ordinary, one of those lazy mornings that precede major events, and that we keep in our memory with nostalgic affection precisely because they represent the last time our life still made complete sense. It was exactly 9:17 in the morning of a May 15th. I know the exact time because I was looking at the old wall clock in the kitchen when the world as I knew it began to crumble, its golden hands marking the precise moment when 3 decades and 5 years of maternal relationship revealed themselves as a carefully maintained lie. The morning sun entered obliquely through the kitchen window, creating geometric patterns of light and shadow on the white ceramic floor that I had personally chosen during the house renovation, while the comforting aroma of fresh coffee mixed with the scent of the garden roses that Marcos cultivated with obsessive dedication every weekend. I was preparing my ritual breakfast, whole wheat toast with homemade strawberry jam that my neighbor Donna Carmen had given me the previous week, freshly squeezed orange juice because Marcos insisted that natural vitamin C made a difference to health, and especially that large cup of pure, strong coffee that gave me energy to face the final preparations for the graduation that would happen in exactly 7 hours. The graduation in pedagogy after 5 years of intensive night studies that I had completed while maintaining my day job as an elementary school teacher, sacrificing weekends, holidays, and countless hours of sleep to finally earn the university degree that my mother Helena always said was the only asset that no one can take from you, daughter. It was when I climbed the wooden stairs that creaked familiarly under my bare feet, carrying the steaming cup of coffee carefully so as not to spill on the newly painted ice, white walls, that the feeling that something was deeply wrong began to form in my stomach like an icy stone. The guest room door was ajar, a door that I was absolutely certain I had closed the night before, after carefully hanging my graduation dress. That navy blue dress that had cost 3 months of rigorous saving, cutting superfluous expenses, not going out with friends, buying only the essentials to be able to pay the installments at the store. The dress that represented not just a piece of clothing, but the physical materialization of years of effort, sleepless nights studying for exams, assignments delivered at the deadline, and especially the achievement of a dream that seemed impossible when I started the course at 30, hearing discouraging comments about being too old to go back to school. I pushed the door slowly, that kind of cautious movement we make when our primitive instinct detects danger, but our rational mind hasn't yet processed exactly what threat awaits us. The first thing I noticed was the open window. I was sure I had closed it because the weather forecast had announced the possibility of rain during the night, and I didn't want to risk the humidity affecting the delicate fabric of the dress. The white voile curtain swayed gently with the morning breeze, creating dancing shadows on the light wooden floor that we had installed the previous year. But it was when my eyes turned to the rack where the dress should have been perfectly hung, protected by the transparent plastic cover that the saleswoman had insisted on including for free to preserve this beautiful piece, that my world began to spin in slow motion. In place of the elegant dress that I had tried on at least 10 times in the last few weeks, adjusting every detail, checking the fit, imagining myself going up on stage to receive my diploma, there were only rags. Irregular pieces of navy blue fabric hanging on the hanger like surrender flags after a lost battle. The dress had been methodically destroyed, not torn in 1 or 2 places as would happen in an accident, but cut into dozens of irregular strips with what had clearly been a sharp pair of scissors. Each cut deliberate and cruel, transforming 3,500 rees of fine fabric into worthless trash. The sleeves had been separated from the main body and cut in spirals, creating grotesque fabric streamers. The bodice, which had delicate embroidery of small synthetic pearls that discreetly shimmered under the light, was unrecognizable, with the pearls torn off and scattered on the floor like crystallized tears. My knees lost all strength and I had to lean on the doorframe to avoid falling, the coffee cup slipping from my numb fingers and shattering on the floor into 1,000 fragments of white ceramic that mixed with the dark liquid, forming a puddle that looked like diluted blood. The sound of the cup breaking echoed through the silent house like a gunshot, and in seconds Marcos was by my side, still wearing only his pajama shorts, his sleepy eyes quickly becoming alert as he processed the devastating scene before us. "Laura, my God, what happened here?" he asked, his voice a mixture of confusion and growing indignation as his eyes scanned the remains of what had been my graduation dress. But I already knew, with that terrible clarity that sometimes hits us when we finally recognize a pattern that had always been there, Too obvious to be coincidence, but too painful to be consciously acknowledged. Helena had slept at our house the night before, claiming that she wanted to be close to her daughter on the most important day of her life, that she had taken 2 buses and a taxi to get here because she couldn't miss this moment for anything in this world. She had insisted on seeing the dress before going to bed, holding it against her body in front of the mirror while saying seemingly affectionate things that now, in retrospect, sounded like veiled threats. "It's too beautiful for you, daughter. People like us weren't made to wear such fine things. Don't you think you're trying to stand out too much? People will think you're acting better than everyone else." The check of the guest room where Helena had slept confirmed my worst suspicions. The bed was impeccably made as if no one had slept in it. The window was wide open despite the air conditioning being on, waste that Helena always criticized when she was at our house. And on the nightstand, positioned with calculated precision to be impossible not to notice, was the sewing scissors I kept in the drawer of the hallway dresser. The same scissors with long, sharp blades that my grandmother had given me when she taught me to make small repairs to clothes, saying that every woman needs to know how to make do. The blades still had microscopic fragments of navy blue fabric stuck between the metal, irrefutable evidence of the crime that had been committed while I slept peacefully in the next room, unaware that my own mother was methodically destroying one of the most important symbols of my personal achievement. The note was the poisoned cherry on top of this cake of calculated cruelty. Written in Helena's unmistakable handwriting, those round, childish letters she had maintained since adolescence, the lined notebook paper she always carried in her purse, to write down important things. It contained just one sentence that managed to be simultaneously a confession and a denial of responsibility. "Accidents happen when people want more than they deserve to have. Kisses, Mom." The studied casualness of the message, as if destroying her daughter's dress the night before graduation was a minor event, a trivial domestic incident that deserved no more than a quick note, was perhaps even crueler than the physical destruction of the dress. Marcos took the note from my trembling hands and read it 3 times, as if repeating the reading could somehow change the words written on the paper or reveal some less devastating hidden meaning. "Laura, this wasn't an accident. Your mother deliberately destroyed your dress. This is sick. It's abuse. It's a crime. Actually, destruction of private property," he said, his voice gaining strength and indignation as he processed the magnitude of the cruelty that had been committed. "We need to call the police. She can't simply destroy your things and walk away as if nothing happened." But I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even cry. I was in a state of deep shock, my mind desperately trying to reconcile 2 incompatible realities. The mother I thought I knew, who had raised me, fed me, supposedly loved me for 35 years, and the person who had calculatingly waited for me to fall asleep to methodically destroy the symbol of my academic achievement. Memories began to reorganize themselves under this new revealing light. All those moments throughout the years when important things. Around 3 in the morning, when the silence of night was broken only by the occasional distant bark of some sleepless dog or the soft hum of a car engine passing through the deserted street, my phone began to vibrate incessantly on the bedside table, the screen lighting up repeatedly like a sinister beacon announcing a storm. They were messages from Helena, dozens and dozens of them arriving in obsessive bursts, each one schizophrenically alternating between veiled threats written with carefully chosen words to maintain legal ambiguity, declarations of maternal love so exaggerated and theatrical that they sounded like cruel parody of genuine feeling, virulent accusations of family betrayal that attempted to awaken in me the guilt, conditioned by decades of manipulation, and empty promises of change that I had heard so many times before that I could recite them from memory. "Laura, my dear and beloved daughter, I know you're awake at this exact moment, turning in bed while thinking about what you did to me today, the humiliating spectacle to which you subjected me in front of all those people. There's still time to fix this, my love, to go back to being the united and harmonious family we always were before you let strangers poison your mind against your own mother. But if you continue rejecting me in this cruel way, if you insist on treating me like a criminal when all I did was love too much, I don't know what I'm capable of. I can't guarantee that I'll be able to control the pain that is consuming me. A mother rejected and publicly humiliated is capable of anything, absolutely anything, to recover the love of the daughter she gestated, breastfed, raised with such sacrifice." The calculated ambiguity between desperate plea and veiled threat was Helena's classic signature, a master at keeping her victims in a perpetual state of hyper-vigilant alert, never knowing if the next move would be manipulative tears or devastating verbal attacks. With trembling hands and racing heart, I turned off the phone completely, the small act of pressing the power button feeling simultaneously like liberation and betrayal. And I desperately tried to go back to sleep, closing my eyes tightly and trying to empty my mind through breathing techniques I had learned in years of therapy. But the shrill and invasive sound of the doorbell at 4:30 in the morning made me literally jump out of bed in visceral panic, my entire body reacting with pure adrenaline to the sound that pierced the silence of dawn like a war siren. Marcos woke up immediately, his protective reflexes instantly activated as he rose with surprising agility for someone who was in deep sleep seconds before. "Stay here, love. I'll see who it is," he said with a firm but gentle voice, already quickly putting on his robe while walking toward the door. But I already knew with absolute certainty who it was. Only Helena would have the monumental audacity, the absurd brazenness, the complete lack of boundaries or decency to show up at our house in the early hours after everything that had happened on that catastrophic day. I silently got up and approached the bedroom window, carefully pulling back the curtain just enough to peek. And there she was, still wearing exactly the same outfit she had worn to the graduation ceremony, now completely wrinkled and stained, disheveled hair forming a chaotic halo around her face, makeup completely smeared creating dark trails on her cheeks like ink tears, screaming with a hoarse and desperate voice for me to open the door because she urgently needed to explain everything and fix our relationship before it was too late to save our family. "Laura, I know you're in there listening to me." I saw the bedroom light turn on when I rang the doorbell. "Please, my daughter, my love, my life, let me in for just 5 minutes. I'm truly sorry this time. I swear on your grandmother's memory that this time is different. I promise I'll change completely. I'll go to therapy every day if necessary. I'll take medication. I'll be the mother you've always dreamed of and deserved to have," she shouted with increasing volume, her voice echoing down the silent street and certainly waking up the entire neighborhood trying to sleep peacefully. Between the melodramatic and desperate pleas, there were moments of pure, unfiltered anger that revealed her true nature. "Either you open this door right now, Laura, or I'll tell everyone, absolutely everyone, that you're an unnatural, ungrateful, cruel daughter who abandoned her own mother in her time of greatest need. I'll go on social media right now. I'll do live streams. I'll expose you for the whole world to see what kind of monster you really are behind that mask of dedicated teacher. I'll tell them how you humiliated me, how you let strangers mistreat me, how you chose the side of strangers against your own mother." The schizophrenic and disorienting alternation between tearful pleas and virulent threats was as predictable as the sunrise. But even knowing her patterns for decades, it still managed to stir something primitive inside me. Marcos picked up his cell phone to call the police, already dialing the numbers with determination, but I gently placed my hand over his, stopping him with a soft but firm touch. "No, my love, that's exactly what she wants. To create an even bigger drama, a public scandal she can manipulate and use to portray herself as an unjustly victimized person before society. Let's simply ignore it completely until she gets tired and leaves on her own," I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my attempt to appear calm and rational. It was one of the most difficult and painful decisions I've ever made in my entire life. Every fiber of my being, every cell conditioned by decades of systematic manipulation and emotional brainwashing, desperately wanted to run to the door, open it dramatically, calm Helena with gentle words, hug her, do absolutely anything to stop the scandal that was certainly embarrassing and disturbing our innocent neighbors. But I knew with crystal clarity that giving in now, showing any sign of weakness, would undo all the psychological progress I had made on that transformative day. Helena needed to learn once and for all that her manipulative tactics, her emotional games, her dramatic performances no longer worked on me. For 2 interminable hours that seemed to last an eternity, Helena stubbornly remained at our door like a sentinel of chaos, methodically alternating between pounding with her fists hard enough to make the wood tremble on its hinges, ringing the doorbell insistently in rhythmic bursts that seemed like Morse code of desperation, crying loudly with theatrical sobs that echoed down the silent street, shouting increasingly elaborate and creative accusations about my cruelty and ingratitude, and making threats that escalated in dramatism and morbid specificity. "I'll throw myself in front of the first car that passes on this street and leave a detailed letter saying it was your fault, that you pushed me to this with your cruel rejection. I'll take all the medicine I have at home, all the pills at once, and you'll have to live with that guilt for the rest of your miserable life. I'll disappear without a trace and you'll spend the rest of your days wondering if I'm alive or dead, if I'm suffering somewhere because of you. If you could have prevented this tragedy if you had simply opened this door." Each threat was more dramatic, more elaborate, more carefully calculated to awaken guilt and panic than the previous one. But I remained firm as a rock, tightly embraced by Marcos in our bedroom that had transformed into an emotional bunker, resisting with all my strength decades of Pavlovian conditioning that screamed at me to save Helena from herself, to be the hero daughter who always sacrificed her own well-being for her eternally in crisis mother. Finally, around 6:30 in the morning, when the sun was already beginning to rise, painting the sky with orange and pink hues, and the first early, rising neighbors were starting to leave their homes for work, casting curious and disapproving glances at the disheveled woman making a scene in the street, Helena finally seemed to realize that her elaborate performance wasn't having the desired effect, that her target audience was refusing to participate in the spectacle. I clearly heard the characteristic sound of her high heels moving away on the concrete sidewalk, each step echoing with resigned purpose, then the sound of a car engine struggling to start before stabilizing, and finally the sound of the vehicle gradually fading until it disappeared in the distance. The sudden silence that followed was simultaneously relieving like a weight being removed from my chest and disturbing like the calm before the storm. I knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't over, that Helena was merely retreating strategically to regroup and plan her next attack strategy, more elaborate and devastating. But at least for now, for this precious moment, there was peace. "You were absolutely incredible, brave beyond any description," Marcos said with a voice choked with emotion and admiration, hugging me with protective strength while silent tears ran down my exhausted face. I deeply know how difficult it must have been, almost impossible not to give in to the impulse to open the door, not to try to calm her down as you were programmed to do since childhood, not to fall into the emotional trap she so carefully prepared. But you did the right thing, the only right thing. She needs to understand unequivocally that she can no longer control you through calculated drama and emotional manipulation. His words were deeply comforting, a balm for my wounded soul. But I felt emotionally exhausted at a level that transcended physical tiredness, as if I had run a mental marathon through psychological minefields. The systematic conditioning of a lifetime doesn't magically disappear in one day, no matter how transformative, and resisting the emotional triggers that Helena knew so intimately, that she had installed and refined over decades, required a psychological energy that left me completely drained. The next day, when I finally gathered enough courage to turn my phone back on with hands trembling with apprehension, there were more than 100 voice messages from Helena waiting like emotional bombs, each more dramatic, elaborate, and manipulative than the previous one, forming a distorted symphony of wounded narcissism. There were also dozens of messages from distant relatives she had managed to contact during her manic dawn, all deeply concerned and some clearly outraged by the elaborately distorted stories she had told about a cruel and unnatural daughter who had publicly humiliated her sick and defenseless mother, and then cruelly refused to help her when she was in desperate crisis. The lies were impressively elaborate and full of specific details that gave them verisimilitude. She claimed to have been diagnosed with a terminal illness that she was heroically hiding so as not to worry her daughters, said that the dress had been destroyed in a regrettable accident when she tried to help fix it, and that I was monstrously overreacting. Stated with absolute conviction that she had been specially invited by the dean's office to go on stage to receive a surprise tribute as an exemplary mother, and that I had been consumed by sick jealousy. I spent the entire morning, each minute seeming to drag like an hour, patiently responding to concerned relatives, calmly explaining and with rich detail the truth of what had happened. Sending the photos I had taken of the methodically destroyed dress pieces as irrefutable physical evidence, sharing written and signed accounts from eyewitnesses of the embarrassing scene at graduation. Some relatives immediately believed my version, especially those who had known Helena long enough to have personally witnessed her erratic behaviors and narcissistic outbursts. Others remained stubbornly skeptical, preferring to believe Helena's elaborate narrative because it was psychologically more comfortable than accepting the disturbing reality that a mother could do something so calculatedly cruel to her own daughter. It was deeply painful to realize how many people consciously preferred to maintain the comforting illusion of a perfect family, rather than confront the uncomfortable and disturbing reality of systematic abuse. Sophia called me in the middle of the morning, her voice showing the same kind of deep emotional exhaustion that I was feeling. Mom spent the entire night obsessively calling everyone she knows or has ever known, telling increasingly absurd and fantastical versions of what happened, each story more elaborate and victimized than the previous one. Some people are telling me that she's planning to go personally to the school where you work to expose the truth about you to your superiors and colleagues. Laura, I think we need to seriously consider a legal restraining order before she escalates even further. Sophia's pragmatic suggestion was obviously sensible, but emotionally painful. Obtaining a judicial restraining order against my own biological mother was legally, publicly, and irrevocably admitting that she represented a real and present threat to my physical safety and psychological well-being. You're absolutely right, Sophia. I'll look for a specialized lawyer today, right after I leave work. I agreed with a heavy voice, feeling the monumental weight of the decision settling on my shoulders like a lead cloak. But first, I urgently need to warn my workplace about the situation. Prepare management in case she actually shows up there trying to cause problems. The prospect of having to expose my dysfunctional and embarrassing family situation to my employer and colleagues was mortifying, but absolutely necessary to protect both my hard-earned career and the innocent children under my pedagogical care from being exposed to Helena's erratic and potentially traumatizing behavior. The emergency meeting with the school principal was surprisingly understanding, compassionate, and productive. Ms. Marta, a distinguished 63-year-old woman with always impeccably arranged gray hair and decades of experience in education and school management, listened to my detailed explanation with focused attention and without any trace of judgment in her kind gaze. Laura, dear, unfortunately, this is much more common than you might imagine or would like to believe. We've had similar situations with other employees whose troubled family members tried to interfere in the work environment, create scandals, or use the professional setting as a stage for their personal dramas. We will implement reinforced security measures immediately. Helena will not be permitted to enter the school under any circumstances, and all staff will be discreetly alerted about the situation so they can act appropriately if she shows up. The unconditional institutional support was an immense relief that I hadn't expected, confirming that I wasn't alone in this exhausting battle against destructive narcissism. That afternoon, while methodically preparing teaching materials for my classes the following week, trying to maintain some normalcy amid the chaos, the school secretary discreetly called me for a private conversation. Laura, there's a lady at the main gate claiming to be your mother, vehemently insisting that she needs to speak with you urgently about a very serious family emergency. She's making quite a scene, saying her daughter is in danger. My heart raced in instant panic, but I maintained my professional composure with conscious effort. Please inform her politely but firmly that I am not available and that she does not have authorization to enter the school under any circumstances. If she insists or escalates her behavior, call security immediately without hesitation. It was profoundly painful having to treat my own biological mother as a security threat requiring intervention from security guards, but Helena had created this unbearable situation with her own destructive and obsessive choices. Through the high-definition security monitors strategically installed throughout the school, I saw Helena at the main iron gate, dramatically gesturing with wide, theatrical movements while desperately trying to convince the uniformed security guard to let her in. She alternated between copious tears that seemed to appear and stop on command, and strident screams that could certainly be heard blocks away, showing old photos of us that she had brought in a folder to prove she was really my mother, accusing the school of kidnapping, false imprisonment and conspiracy to separate a family, threatening to call the press, police, lawyers, politicians, any authority she could imagine to expose the absurd scandal of an educational institution preventing a concerned mother from seeing her daughter in danger. The security guard, visibly well trained for such situations, remained impassively firm and professional, repeating like a mantra that without prior written authorization, absolutely no one could enter the school, whether parents, relatives, or anyone else. After 40 unbearable minutes of increasingly desperate and creative attempts, Helena finally seemed to accept temporary defeat, but not without first screaming at maximum volume, ensuring everyone within blocks could hear, "Laura, I know you're in there listening to me, hiding like a coward. This won't stand, do you hear me? A mother has sacred rights that no court order can take away. You'll bitterly regret treating me in this inhuman way. I gave you life, carried you for 9 months, nearly died in childbirth, and this is how you repay me?" Her melodramatic threats echoed across the school courtyard like ancient curses, and I saw several fellow teachers looking at me through the windows with a complex mixture of morbid curiosity and genuine compassion. The acute humiliation of having my dysfunctional family life so publicly exposed in my workplace was intense and burned like acid. But at least now, everyone viscerally understood that I was dealing with a serious and potentially dangerous situation of systematic family harassment. The lawyer I consulted that week, Dr. Paulo Mendez, was a distinguished 48-year-old man, specialized in complex cases of domestic violence and family harassment, with a simultaneously professional and compassionate demeanor that inspired immediate confidence. His office, decorated with diplomas and certifications, but also with plants and photographs that humanized the environment, created an atmosphere that managed to be both serious and welcoming. He listened to my complete story with focused and empathetic attention, taking detailed notes in his brown leather notebook while occasionally nodding in understanding. Ms. Laura, what you are describing clearly and unambiguously constitutes systematic psychological harassment, criminal disturbance of peace, and quite possibly family stalking, which is indeed legally recognized. The fact that there are multiple eyewitnesses to your mother's abusive behaviors, especially the public and traumatic incident at the graduation with so many witnesses, significantly strengthens your case for an emergency restraining order, he explained in a calm but firm voice, showing me similar legal precedents in thick legal volumes. But doctor, she is my biological mother. Aren't judges usually more lenient and understanding in family cases, especially when it involves mothers and daughters? I asked with genuine concern, fearing that the judicial system wouldn't take threats from a nearly 60-year-old woman against her own adult and professionally established daughter seriously enough. His response was enlightening, encouraging, and revealing about important social changes. On the contrary, Ms. Laura, courts have increasingly recognized, based on extensive psychological and social research, that family abuse can be as or more psychologically devastating than violence from strangers, precisely because it comes from those who should protect and love unconditionally. The fact that she is your biological mother does not give her the right to harass, threaten, pursue, or disturb your peace. We will meticulously document absolutely everything: text and voice messages, security videos, written and sworn testimonies from witnesses, police records, and present a solid and indisputable case. The exhaustive process of formally documenting decades of psychological abuse in legal detail was emotionally devastating, but simultaneously therapeutically liberating. Each specific incident that I meticulously described for the court records was an official and legal validation that my experiences were real, concrete, and significant, that the suffering had not been imagination, exaggeration, or excessive sensitivity, as Helena always claimed. Sophia courageously agreed to provide her own extensive and detailed testimony, describing similar patterns of psychological abuse she had suffered over the years, substantially strengthening the argument that Helena had an established and consistent history of abusive behavior with both daughters. During this turbulent period of legal preparation, Helena escalated her tactics in an alarming and progressively more concerning manner. She created multiple fake profiles on every imaginable social network to publicly defame me, posting elaborately invented stories about a monstrously ungrateful daughter who had cruelly abandoned her sick and defenseless mother. She sent anonymous letters to all the neighbors on our street with grotesquely distorted versions of events, systematically trying to turn the entire community against me through calculated lies. Appeared without warning at the family doctor's office who had been treating us for 2 decades, crying profusely while claiming to be deeply concerned about my clearly deteriorating mental health, and begging him to commit me psychiatrically for my own good and safety. Each desperate and invasive action only provided more concrete evidence for the legal process, but the emotional toll of being constantly under attack, in a permanent state of hypervigilance, was absolutely devastating. The final straw came when Helena, through methods I never fully discovered, managed to find Marcos's parents' residential address and showed up without warning at their house on a Sunday morning during family breakfast, crying hysterically and dramatically, begging them to convince their son to divorce me before it was too late, and something terrible happened. Donna Carmen called me immediately, her voice clearly disturbed and indignant. "Laura, your mother is here creating a monumental scandal, saying horrible things about you being dangerous, having serious hereditary mental problems, that Marcos is in mortal danger being married to you, that you've already demonstrated violent behavior. We've already called the police and she's being escorted out, but I thought you should know immediately. The fact that Helena was actively trying to destroy my marriage through lies to my in-laws unequivocally demonstrated that she had completely lost any notion of boundaries, decency, or rationality. The crucial hearing for the restraining order was scheduled for exactly 3 weeks after the traumatic incident at the graduation ceremony. Helena appeared in court accompanied by a questionable-looking attorney she had managed to hire with money borrowed from unknown sources, still desperately trying to maintain the elaborate facade of a victim wronged by a cruel daughter. She wore a purposefully simple and shapeless black dress, clearly chosen strategically to appear fragile, helpless and harmless, and had applied makeup in a calculated way to look significantly paler, sicker, and more debilitated than she actually was. Her entire appearance had been meticulously constructed like a theatrical costume to evoke maximum sympathy and compassion from the judge. The judge responsible for the case was the respectable Dr. Roberto Almeida, an experienced 55-year-old man, known in legal circles for his vast experience in complex cases of domestic and family violence, as well as his ability to see through manipulations. When he entered the courtroom with his imposing black robe, Helena immediately initiated her rehearsed performance, audibly sniffling and wiping away non-existent tears with a white lace handkerchief that she brandished like a theatrical prop. The glaring contrast between her pathetic attempt to appear fragile and victimized and the concrete and abundant evidence of her aggressive and obsessive behaviors that were about to be presented was almost comical in its obviousness. My lawyer methodically presented with surgical precision each piece of evidence: the pieces of the destroyed navy blue dress in labeled plastic evidence bags, high-resolution photographs of the university diploma torn to pieces, video recordings from the school security circuits, showing Helena trying to force entry while shouting threats, prints of literally hundreds of progressively more threatening and manipulative messages, written and sworn statements from multiple eyewitnesses of the embarrassing scene at the graduation ceremony, official police reports about her unsolicited and disturbing appearances at my house during the early hours. Each individual piece of evidence contributed to painting an undeniable picture of systematic harassment, obsessive and clearly escalating disturbing and potentially dangerous behavior. When Helena's turn to present her defense finally came, she launched into an elaborate and rehearsed narrative about being a tragically misunderstood, loving mother, an innocent victim of an ambitious and cruel daughter who had coldly abandoned her for considering her family of origin inferior and embarrassing after achieving university education and social ascension. Your Honor, all I wanted, with a mother's heart overflowing with love and pride, was to participate in my beloved daughter's graduation ceremony, to share that special and unique moment that I had dreamed of since she was a baby. The dress was a regrettable accident during an argument that she provoked. The diploma tore accidentally when I tried to hug her effusively, and going up on stage was just natural maternal emotion overflowing in a moment of legitimate pride. She lied brazenly with conviction worthy of an actress, completely ignoring the concrete and abundant evidence to the contrary. Helena's lawyer pathetically tried to argue that the described behaviors were merely exaggerated but understandable expressions of intense maternal love, and that a restraining order would be disproportionate, cruel, and inhumane for an elderly and sick mother who just desperately wanted reconciliation with her beloved daughter. He painted a melodramatic picture of Helena as a fragile and emotionally unstable woman due to the cruel abandonment by her ungrateful daughters, suggesting that I was vindictively exaggerating minor incidents out of personal resentment and my husband's influence. It was deeply painful to hear my experience of decades of abuse being minimized, distorted, and invalidated. But I maintained my composure with superhuman effort, trusting that the concrete evidence would speak louder than empty rhetoric. The decisive and revealing moment came when the judge, cutting through the manipulation attempts, asked Helena directly with a firm voice, "Ma'am, can you explain specifically and straightforwardly why you deliberately destroyed your daughter's dress?" Helena visibly hesitated, clearly not expecting such a direct and inescapable question. It was a regrettable misunderstanding, Your Honor. I was just holding the dress to admire it more closely, and it accidentally tore, she answered with a trembling voice, her lie so obviously false that it was insulting. The judge frowned deeply. "Ma'am, the photographic evidence unequivocally demonstrates that the dress was cut into multiple pieces with scissors in deliberate and precise cuts. This is not at all consistent with an accidental tear." Confronted with the glaring and undeniable inconsistency in her story, Helena quickly began to lose the composure she had so carefully maintained. "She constantly provoked me, always excluding me from everything, making me feel inferior and inadequate, thinking she's better than her own mother just because she has a diploma. I had every right to be angry after years of contempt." She exploded with genuine fury, inadvertently publicly admitting that the destruction had been completely intentional and premeditated. Her lawyer desperately tried to intervene to control the damage, but it was too late. Helena had revealed her true narcissistic and violent nature for the entire court to see. Judge Dr. Roberto Almeida granted the restraining order without hesitation, clearly determining that Helena should maintain a minimum distance of 100 meters from me, my residence, my workplace, and was expressly prohibited from making contact by any means, telephone, messages, social media, or through third parties. The evidence presented clearly demonstrates without a shadow of doubt an established pattern of systematic harassment and disturbing behavior that fully justifies urgent protective measures, he declared with authority. Ms. Helena is formally warned that any violation of this order will result in severe legal consequences, including immediate arrest. Helena left the courtroom in complete disarray, screaming hysterically, accusing the judicial system of an elaborate conspiracy, threatening to appeal to higher courts and international tribunals, declaring that this was a historic injustice against sacred maternal love. Her lawyer was frantically trying to calm her while physically escorting her out, clearly embarrassed and regretful for having taken the case. I remained seated in the hard court chair, feeling a complex mixture of profound relief and devastating sadness. I had obtained vital legal protection, but at the definitive and irrevocable cost of any residual hope for a relationship with my biological mother. In the subsequent weeks, Helena obsessively tested the limits of the restraining order in every possible way without technically violating it. She appeared like a sinister apparition in public places where she knew I would be, keeping herself precisely 101 meters away with a measuring tape. She sent unsolicited gifts and dramatic letters to my house through delivery services, technically not making direct contact. She posted public messages on social media without directly tagging me, but obviously directed at me, talking about ungrateful daughters who destroy loving mothers, and the karma that awaits those who abandon family. Each action meticulously calculated to disturb me psychologically without providing legal grounds for arrest. It was Sophia who finally found the courage to confront Helena definitively and irreversibly. She arranged to meet our mother at a busy public cafe, secretly recording the entire conversation for her own legal protection. "Mother, you need to stop immediately. You are systematically destroying any remote possibility of future reconciliation with your obsessive and sick actions. Laura will not give in to manipulation. Never again, and you're only publicly humiliating yourself," Sophia said with unwavering firmness that I had never witnessed her use with Helena. Helena's response was brutally revealing. "Sophia, you've always been the weaker daughter, more easily manipulated and controlled. Don't pretend to be strong and independent now just because Laura gave you courage. You always have been and always will be my puppet." Helena's casual and cruel admission that she always saw her daughters as objects to be controlled and manipulated was the final and definitive validation Sophia needed to completely cut ties. She sent me the complete recording, and we both cried together on the phone for hours. Not tears of sadness, but of cathartic relief for finally having recorded an irrefutable confirmation that Helena always saw us as narcissistic extensions of herself to manipulate at her convenience, never as independent people deserving of genuine love and basic respect. It was devastatingly painful but profoundly liberating to definitively accept that we never had a real mother, just a pathological narcissist who played the role of mother when theatrically convenient. An absolutely unexpected and disturbing development occurred when Ricardo showed up without warning at my workplace exactly 1 month after the restraining order was officially issued, looking like he had aged a decade in weeks. Even more hunched and defeated than I had ever seen him in all the years of our dysfunctional coexistence. His eyes, previously always evasive and avoidant, now carried a different weight, no longer the habitual cowardice I knew so well, but something that seemed like genuine remorse mixed with belated determination. "Laura, I came to warn you personally that I'm leaving for good. I'm going to another state, maybe another country, to start completely from scratch away from all this toxic madness that I helped create through my cowardly omission. I know deeply that I was a terrible father, worse than absent. I was present but absent, who consciously allowed Helena to systematically destroy you while hiding cowardly behind the pathetic excuse of domestic peace. I don't expect or deserve forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that finally, too late, I understood the devastating extent of the damage I caused by deliberate omission, by chosen cowardice, by selfishness disguised as pacifism," he said with a choked voice, handing me a thick brown envelope before quickly leaving, almost running, as if fleeing not just from me, but from decades of accumulated guilt. The heavy envelope contained a 12-page handwritten letter with trembling but legible handwriting, where Ricardo detailed with painful precision decades of specific regrets, exact moments where he should have intervened but consciously chose complicit silence, brutal recognition that he had deliberately sacrificed his innocent daughters to maintain his own cowardly peace. Each page was a confession of complicity, an admission that he always knew exactly what Helena was doing, but chose to pretend not to see because confronting her would be too uncomfortable for his quiet existence. There was also a check for a considerable amount. Not enough to compensate for years of criminal neglect, but apparently everything he had managed to secretly save over decades in an account Helena was unaware of. The letter ended with words that made me cry not from sadness, but from validation. Use this money exclusively for therapy, to build the full life you deserve, to heal wounds that should never have been inflicted, for anything except trying to fix what Helena and I irreparably broke. Some things can't be fixed, only overcome. Don't look for me. Let me disappear into the shame I deserve to carry alone. Ricardo's abrupt and definitive departure left Helena completely alone for the first time in her adult life, without a husband to financially support her or serve as a captive audience, without daughters to manipulate and control, without a guaranteed audience for her endless dramatic performances. Through mutual acquaintances who occasionally updated me even without my asking, I learned that she had been evicted from her apartment for months of delinquent payments, that she was living on increasingly scarce favors from acquaintances who quickly tired of her constant dramas and impossible demands, that she had systematically alienated every well-intentioned person who tried to help her with her transparent manipulations and absurd demands. The downward spiral was predictable, but no less tragic. Helena was reaping exactly what she had sown during decades of toxic behavior. 6 months after the traumatic graduation, on a rainy Tuesday morning, I received a call from the municipal hospital that made me freeze instantly. Helena had been admitted to the ICU after a genuine suicide attempt, no longer a theatrical manipulation or empty threat like so many times before, but a massive and premeditated overdose of medications that almost succeeded in killing her, being saved only by the coincidence of a neighbor who found her unconscious. The head nurse, a woman with a tired but kind voice, explained with professional care that she had left a farewell letter repeatedly mentioning my name, and delicately asked if I would like to visit her, adding that her condition was critical but stable. It was the most heart-wrenching decision I had faced since the graduation events. Part of me, that inner child still desperate for maternal love, felt the conditioned Pavlovian reflex to immediately run to save Helena, while the adult and rational part, painstakingly built through years of therapy, knew with crystal clarity that getting involved again would be catastrophically destructive to my hard-won mental sanity. I consulted my therapist in an emergency session, Dr. Anna Carolina, who had been seeing me weekly since the catastrophic graduation events, intimately knowing every nuance of my trauma. Her office, with its lush plants and filtered natural light, had become my sanctuary of healing. Laura, Helena's suicide attempt is undoubtedly tragic, and your conflicting feelings are absolutely natural and expected. But I need to remind you with compassionate firmness that this is not, never was, and never will be your responsibility. You established healthy and necessary boundaries for valid and documented reasons, because her behavior was consistently toxic, destructive, and dangerous to your life and well-being. If you choose to visit her, you need to be emotionally prepared for the very real possibility that absolutely nothing has fundamentally changed, that she will use this critical situation as yet another sophisticated tool for emotional manipulation. She advised with the wisdom of someone who had witnessed countless similar cases. After 3 days of torturous reflection, consulting Marcos, Sophia, and diving deeply into my own contradictory feelings, I decided not to visit Helena in the hospital. It was a decision I knew would haunt me in some way for the rest of my life, but it was the only possible decision to preserve my mental health. Instead, I carefully drafted a formal letter that I sent through my lawyer, explaining in precise but not cruel words that I sincerely wished for her physical and psychological recovery, but that I could not and would not personally involve myself in her treatment or recovery. I gently suggested that she take advantage of the forced hospitalization to seek genuine and intensive psychiatric help, to finally confront the destructive behavioral patterns that had inexorably led her to that desperate situation. It was excruciating to maintain this necessary distance, every fiber of my conditioned being screaming that I was being a monstrous daughter, but it was absolutely vital to protect the psychological progress I had achieved with such effort in recent months. Helena survived against medical odds and was subsequently transferred to a state psychiatric institution for prolonged and involuntary treatment. Through official channels, I learned that the official diagnosis, after weeks of evaluation by multiple professionals, included severe narcissistic personality disorder, with prominent borderline traits and occasional psychotic episodes. clinically confirming what I had intuitively suspected for years. The treatment was not optional or negotiable. The state had legally determined that she represented a clear and present risk to herself and potentially to others, based on the extensively documented history of obsessive harassment, multiple violations of court orders, and the nearly fatal suicide attempt. It was a tragically appropriate but inevitable end to decades of destructive behavior, systematically untreated, denied, and rationalized. During her prolonged psychiatric hospitalization, Helena obsessively wrote letters to me and Sophia, dozens of them, erratically oscillating between what seemed like genuine remorse and the same toxic manipulations as always. Some letters contained apparently lucid acknowledgments of the devastating damage caused, and elaborate requests for forgiveness with detailed promises of change. Others virulently blamed us for her current state, describing in morbid detail how our cruelty had driven her to that place. Still others made veiled and disturbing threats about what would happen when she inevitably got out and settled scores. The dramatic inconsistency painfully revealed that even with intensive psychiatric treatment, heavy medication, and daily therapy, the fundamental personality change that would be necessary for any possibility of a healthy relationship would likely never occur. Some psychological damage is simply too deep, too ingrained, to be repaired. 1 year after the transformative graduation, I was unexpectedly invited to be the keynote speaker at a national conference on education and family trauma. With a racing heart but firm determination, I told my story publicly for the first time. Without mentioning specific names, but being brutally honest about the devastating experience of growing up with a pathologically narcissistic mother and how it had paradoxically shaped my empathetic approach as an educator. I spoke about recognizing signs of abuse in children, about the importance of educators being safe harbors, about breaking generational cycles of trauma. The audience's response was absolutely overwhelming. Dozens of educators approached afterward with tears in their eyes to share their own secretly kept stories, to thank me for the courage to speak openly about a subject still deeply taboo in our society that romanticizes family bonds at any cost. A newly graduated young teacher sought me out sobbing after the talk, her young face contorted in painful recognition. "You described my mother with frightening accuracy. Every word, every pattern, every manipulation. I have my graduation ceremony in 2 months and was absolutely terrified of inviting her because I know with certainty that she will create some elaborate drama to destroy my moment, as she's always done with every achievement of mine. Your story, your courage, gave me strength to establish clear boundaries for the first time in my life. Thank you for showing me that it's possible to survive and thrive." I hugged that trembling young woman, seeing in her crystalline reflections of myself years ago, desperately hoping she could avoid at least some of the unnecessary suffering I had faced by not recognizing the warning signs sooner. Sophia and I became not just completely reconciled sisters after years of forced distance, but genuine best friends and unwavering allies. Together, we created an informal but structured support group for adult survivors of parental narcissistic abuse, meeting religiously every first Saturday of the month in a welcoming space we rented, sharing painful experiences, practical survival strategies, boundary setting techniques, and mainly offering mutual validation in a society that still insists on romanticizing toxic family bonds, with empty platitudes about blood being thicker than water. The group grew exponentially, revealing how many people carried identical wounds in ashamed silence, thinking they were isolated cases, that they were the wrong ones for not being able to unconditionally love abusive parents. During one particularly emotional meeting, Sophia made a revelation that deeply shocked me, despite all the therapy and processing I had done. You know, after 2 years of intensive therapy, I finally admitted to myself something terrible. I always consciously knew that mother was abusive, always clearly saw what she did to Laura. But it was calculatedly easier to feign neutrality, to play dumb, to let Laura be the main target and absorb most of the abuse, because that way I suffered less, flew under the radar. It was pure and conscious cowardice on my part, a selfish choice of self, preservation at my sister's expense, and I carry that corrosive guilt to this day. Laura has forgiven me, but forgiving myself is a journey I'm still traveling. Her brutal honesty about her own passive complicity through omission was painful to hear, but absolutely necessary for our complete mutual healing. I completely forgave Sophia in that moment, viscerally understanding that she had also been a victim, just with different survival strategies than mine. Where I confronted, she hid. Where I absorbed, she deflected. 2 years after graduation, on an autumn morning with golden leaves falling, I received news through my lawyer that Helena had finally been discharged from the psychiatric institution after prolonged treatment and was now living in a modest government, subsidized rest home, regularly monitored by social workers. She had frantically tried to contact every imaginable distant relative for money, shelter, and emotional support, but her reputation preceded her like a shadow. Absolutely everyone knew about the public scandal at graduation, about the restraining order, about the suicide attempt, about the forced psychiatric commitment. She was effectively and deservedly alone in the world, a direct and just consequence of decades spent alienating, manipulating, and systematically abusing everyone who genuinely tried to approach her with love or compassion. Marcos asked me one night as we were having dinner, after a long contemplative silence, if I felt guilt about Helena being alone, sick and helpless in her premature old age. I thought carefully before answering, savoring the weight of the question. I feel a deep sadness for the life she could have had if she had made different choices, if she had sought help when change was still possible, if she had chosen love over control. But guilt? No, not a drop. She literally had thousands of opportunities over decades to change, to seek help, to be minimally a better mother. She consciously, deliberately, consistently chose the path of manipulation and abuse to its final consequences. Her current circumstances are the direct and fair result of her choices, not of my reactions to those choices. It was a conclusion that had taken years of intensive therapy, deep reflection, and painful internal work to reach, but it was genuine, solid, and liberating. Life wonderfully continued flowing, and with it came new significant achievements that Helena could no longer destroy or taint with her toxic envy. I completed with distinction my master's degree in special education with a focus on childhood trauma, published groundbreaking academic articles on the impacts of family trauma on child development and intervention strategies, was promoted to regional pedagogical coordinator responsible for implementing support programs for traumatized children. Each success was effusively celebrated with people who genuinely rejoiced in my achievements without a shadow of envy or attempts at sabotage. It was the kind of unconditional support and genuine celebration that every child should naturally receive from parents, but that I had needed to seek and find elsewhere, building my own chosen family. When I discovered I was pregnant with my first child, an avalanche of primal fears assaulted me about repeating toxic generational patterns. The questions tormented me during sleepless nights. What if motherhood awakened in me the same narcissistic demons that had possessed Helena? What if I became controlling, manipulative, and abusive without even realizing it, thinking I was being a dedicated mother? What if the trauma was so deeply ingrained in my psychological DNA that I couldn't escape it? Dr. Anna Carolina patiently helped me work through these paralyzing fears in intensive sessions. Laura, the simple fact that you are deeply concerned about the possibility of repeating patterns already categorically demonstrates that you are fundamentally, structurally different from Helena. She never at any point questioned her behaviors, never voluntarily sought help, never showed genuine concern for her daughter's emotional well-being. Yourself, awareness, and commitment to breaking the cycle are your greatest protection. The birth of my son on a sunny spring morning was a moment of profound healing that transcended any therapy. Holding that tiny and completely vulnerable being, feeling the tsunami of unconditional and protective love that naturally emerged without any effort, made me viscerally, cellularly understand what Helena had cruelly denied to me in Sophia. A true mother instinctively protects, naturally nurtures, genuinely celebrates. She doesn't destroy out of envy, doesn't sabotage out of insecurity, doesn't compete for attention. The authentic and overwhelming maternal love I felt instantly for my son definitively validated that the problem had never, ever been with me. Helena simply did not possess the basic emotional capacity for healthy maternal love, a fundamental deficiency in her psychological structure that no perfect daughter could have compensated for. I raised my son with principles diametrically opposed to those I had traumatically experienced. His achievements, from first steps to first drawings, were celebrated with pure joy without toxic comparisons or unhealthy competitions. His failures and mistakes were treated as valuable opportunities for learning and growth, never as ammunition for future humiliation. His emotions, whether joy or sadness, anger or fear, were always validated and welcomed, never minimized or ridiculed as drama or weakness. When he had his own kindergarten graduation, a simple but significant event, I cried abundant tears of genuine joy watching him receive his small, colorful cardboard diploma, without any unhealthy impulse to make the moment about me or my own feelings, just pure celebration of his developmental milestone. Sophia had an identical experience with her 3 children, consciously and deliberately breaking every toxic pattern we had inherited. Our children grew up close as siblings, in a healthy and loving extended family that we created from scratch with determination and love. In frequent family gatherings, there was genuine laughter that came from deep within the soul, unconditional mutual support in difficult times, and especially the unwavering security of knowing that no one would ever try to sabotage another's happiness out of envy or insecurity. It was exactly the family we had always desperately dreamed of having, just 1 generation late, but no less precious for that. 5 years after graduation, on a quiet Sunday afternoon while organizing the attic for a move, I found the carefully labeled box with the pieces of the destroyed navy blue dress. I held the fragments of fabric between my fingers, expecting to feel the searing pain or incandescent anger from before, but felt only a serene emotional distance, as if observing artifacts from another life, another person. They were just pieces of old cloth now, faded relics of a battle won long ago, scars that no longer hurt. I briefly thought about throwing them away, burning them ceremonially, but decided to keep them, not out of unhealthy emotional attachment, but as a concrete and tangible reminder of the day I courageously chose to free myself, of the exact moment when the transformation began. On that same significant Sunday, the phone rang. It was Helena's lawyer informing me with a professional but gentle voice that she had passed away during the night at the nursing home. Natural and peaceful death during sleep, without apparent suffering. The lawyer asked about funeral arrangements, and if I would like to receive the few personal belongings she had left, mostly old clothes and notebooks. It was surreal and disorienting to receive the news. I didn't feel the shattering devastation that a normal daughter should feel, just a strange and indefinable emptiness, profound grief for the maternal relationship we never had, rather than for the person who had departed. I cried not for Helena, but for the imaginary mother I had created in my mind during childhood, the one who never existed. Sophia and I organized a simple and dignified funeral, more out of social obligation and psychological closure than genuine desire to honor Helena. Very few people attended the service on a rainy afternoon. Some nurses from the nursing home who had developed professional compassion for Helena despite her difficulties. Some distant relatives who came more out of morbid curiosity than genuine mourning. The lawyer out of professional obligation. During the service, the young and inexperienced pastor spoke generically about divine forgiveness and redemption, clearly uncomfortable having absolutely nothing specific positive to say about the deceased, filling the time with empty religious platitudes. When my turn to speak came, I stood up with slightly trembling legs and was honest but respectful, choosing each word carefully. Helena was my biological mother, and for that I am eternally grateful for the life she gave me, even if not in the way she imagined. The monumental challenges we faced in our relationship taught me unshakable resilience, the vital importance of establishing healthy boundaries, and above all, the iron determination to break toxic generational cycles. I sincerely hope that she has found in death the peace she never managed to find or create in life. These were the kindest and most honest words I could offer, acknowledging the complex reality without unnecessarily romanticizing or demonizing. Among Helena's belongings, I discovered dozens of obsessively filled notebooks where she had compulsively written about me and Sophia during the years of forced separation. Endless pages of distorted and delusional narratives where she was always the suffering and misunderstood victim, we always the ungrateful and cruel villains. But there were also moments of disturbing and unexpected clarity. Admissions written in trembling handwriting of corrosive envy. Fragmented recognition of destructive impulses she couldn't control or understand. It was definitive posthumous evidence that Helena had been a prisoner of her own sick mind, unable to escape the distorted neurological patterns that had inexorably led her to die alone and unmourned. 1 year after Helena's death, I participated in another transformative graduation event, this time watching Marcos receive his doctoral degree after years of dedication. Sitting in the packed audience, deliberately wearing a new navy blue dress that I had chosen especially for the occasion as a symbol of overcoming, I felt a deep and unshakable peace. No shadow of past trauma stained the moment. No fear of sabotage paralyzed me, just pure and genuine joy for the success of the extraordinary man who had unconditionally supported me through the darkest and most difficult moments of my existence. During the emotional ceremony, I observed other families celebrating effusively, and for the first time in my life, I felt no corrosive envy or toxic bitterness. I had built my own healthy and loving family, my own network of unconditional support, my own definition of success that didn't depend on validation from a mother incapable of giving genuine love. Marcos's degree represented not just his impressive academic achievement, but our joint victory over the adversities we had faced together. Today, a full decade after that fateful morning when I found my dress destroyed, I work as the director of a school specialized in children with complex family traumas. My painful personal experience, combined with extensive formal education in educational psychology and years of my own therapy, allows me to identify and help children who are going through situations similar to what I experienced. Each child I help find their authentic voice, establish healthy boundaries, and recognize that abuse is never their fault, is a small but significant victory against the ancient cycle of trauma that Helena perpetuated. I keep the destroyed navy blue dress carefully preserved and framed in a special frame in my office, not as a trophy, but as an educational tool. When outraged parents come to me complaining because their teenage children are being rebellious by establishing basic boundaries, I show them the frame and briefly tell my story. This is the end result of when parents see children as narcissistic extensions of themselves instead of independent individuals with the right to their own identity, I explain with professional calm. Your children aren't being rebellious. They're being healthy and brave. The true graduation, I understood with crystal clarity through the years, wasn't receiving the diploma on that chaotic and traumatic day. It was the gradual, painful, but liberating process of forming myself independent of Helena, of graduating from the toxic need for her impossible approval, of completing the arduous course of self, discovery, and healing that began when she destroyed that dress. Each day, I live authentically being myself. Each boundary I firmly maintain without guilt. Each moment of joy I experience without fear of sabotage or punishment is a renewed and celebrated graduation ceremony. The dress was methodically destroyed, but I was rebuilt stronger than tempered steel. The diploma was torn to pieces, but my education multiplied exponentially in wisdom. The biological mother failed spectacularly in every aspect, but I found genuine motherhood in unexpected places and unlikely people. And most important of all, the terrified girl that Helena tried to control and destroy became a woman she could never manipulate, break, or possess. That is the true unshakable victory. The diploma that no envious hand can tear. The dress that no scissors can destroy. The magnificent and hard-won freedom to be authentically, courageously, completely myself. Did you like Laura's story? Then subscribe to the channel. Leave your like and comment where you're watching from. Oh, and there's another story waiting for you here on the screen. Click there and I'll be waiting for you.